No one knew why Helen Garrison returned to Silver Cross after 30 years, or why she raised her hand at the dusty auction and bought a trembling, half-dead Mustang for just .5 cents. People laughed. They called her crazy. But that same horse-skin overbones, nameless and forgotten, would soon do something that stunned the entire town and healed a woman's heart that had been silent for decades. The late autumn wind swept down from the mountain ridge, dry and bitter, whispering through the tired fences of Silver Cross, Wyoming. It was the kind of town where time didn't bother to move forward anymore, where roofs sagged and paint peeled, and where the last things sold at auction weren't antiques or prized cattle, but the forgotten, the broken, and the unwanted. At the very edge of town, on a dirt lot half swallowed by weeds and dust, the Knox & Sons livestock yard hosted one of its final auctions of the season. There was no fanfare, no banners, no real hope, just a few locals with calloused hands and colder hearts, sipping coffee from tin mugs and waiting to see what misery might shuffle out of the holding pens next. And among them, standing silent near the back of the crowd, in a faded army green coat, was Helen Garrison. 60 years old, sharp-eyed despite the weight of age on her spine, Helen looked like someone who belonged to another time. She had returned to Silver Cross only weeks ago, after nearly 3 decades away. Rumors swirled like the wind. Some said she'd come back because she had cancer. Others whispered about a son she'd lost, a husband who'd vanished. Truth was, no one really knew, and no one had dared ask. She hadn't come to buy. She'd told herself that more than once as she parked her rusted Chevy C10 by the fence line that morning. She was just here to watch. That's all, just something to do, to get out of the house, to feel the cold in her bones and remind herself she was still alive. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the old speaker system, listing off prices that didn't matter. $20 for a limping gelding, $15 for a blind mare. And then, with a half-hearted gesture, a gate creaked open, and it walked out. A horse, or what was left of one. It was a Mustang, though you'd barely know it by the way it moved. Gaunt, ribs pushing against its thin hide like a xylophone, legs trembling with each unsure step. Patches of its coat had fallen away, exposing raw skin. A rope burn curled deep around its neck, and one eye was clouded over. The other, still good, scanned the crowd with something that wasn't fear, wasn't defiance either. It was a kind of resignation, like the animal already knew what was coming. The auctioneer chuckled bitterly, tapping the microphone. Next up, we've got a wild one. Real spirited. Probably used to be somebody's problem. Now he's yours for half a cent. That's right, .5. Anyone? The crowd erupted into laughter. A man in a trucker cap spat tobacco into a cup and muttered, "That horse ain't worth the rope on its neck." Another shouted, "You'd be better off buying a bag of bones from the butcher." Even the auctioneer grinned as he leaned into the mic again. "Come on now, someone give me something. Hell, I'll take a dime for the paperwork." Helen didn't move at first, but something flickered in her, the kind of flicker that comes not from impulse, but from memory. From the slow, quiet burn of something long buried, starting to glow again. She lifted her hand. Just that, nothing grand, no speech, no pause. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady. "I'll take him for the half cent." Silence fell. The auctioneer blinked. "Ma'am, you serious?" She didn't answer. He shrugged. "Well, hell, half a penny it is. Sold." Laughter broke again, louder this time. One woman in a dusty pink hoodie cackled. She just paid half a cent to take home death on legs. But Helen was already walking forward, step by step through the mud and dust and disbelief, toward the horse. He didn't flinch when she approached, didn't shy away or snort or show teeth, just stood there, swaying slightly, as if he could topple over any moment. She stood beside him for a long breath. then another. One hand reached up, slow, deliberate. Not to pet, not yet. Just to be near. Just to show him she wasn't here to finish the breaking. The wind caught the edge of her coat and flapped it against her leg, but she didn't move. Neither did he. "I'll call you later," she whispered, "if you live long enough." She led him gently, slowly toward the open trailer hitched to her Chevy. No force, just presence. Somehow, impossibly, he followed. The crowd stared in silence as the rusted gate clanged shut behind him. Ray Malone, who'd grown up in Silver Cross and had never missed an auction in 50 years, leaned over to the man next to him and said, "That Garrison lady's lost her damn mind." The man replied, "That horse won't make it through the week." But inside the truck, Helen reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror just slightly. Enough to catch the reflection of the Mustang's good eye, glinting faintly from the darkness of the trailer. And for a heartbeat. Just a single second, she could have sworn he was watching her. Not like prey watches a predator, but like someone who might remember being rescued once before. It snowed that night, not much, just enough to lace the eaves of Helen's porch with white and hush the wind in the pine trees. Silver Cross had a way of going silent in the snow, like the town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen or not happen. Inside the old red barn behind her cabin, Helen laid down a thick layer of straw across the floor. It had been years since she'd walked into that place, even longer since it had housed anything alive. The hinges creaked, the rafters moaned, but the bones of the structure held, same as her own, worn but not broken. The Mustang stood in the corner, not tied, not coaxed. He'd wandered there himself once the trailer ramp dropped, and the night grew colder than even he could bear. Helen didn't try to touch him. Not yet. She filled a steel trough with water and a cracked wooden bin with hay. The bin wasn't much better than kindling, but it would do. Everything in her life now was like that, old but serviceable, as if time itself had agreed to give her a second chance, with no guarantees. He didn't drink, not at first, just stood there in the straw, eyeing her from behind that swollen, half-closed eyelid. His chest rose and fell in slow, ragged waves. She didn't speak. She didn't approach. She simply left the lantern hanging on a nail and walked out into the freezing dark. In the morning, the hay was disturbed. The water level had gone down. A single hoof print had smudged the far wall. It was enough. She still didn't name him. Every day followed a rhythm. Coffee, radio, boots, walk to the barn, quietly slide open the door, never too fast, never too eager. Speak softly if she had to speak at all. He was always there, watching. The townspeople, when they saw Helen at the feed store or walking the back road to her mailbox, asked questions with their eyes but never their mouths. Silver Cross folks weren't nosy. They were judgmental. Ray Malone, her neighbor across the dirt road, was the only one bold enough to say something. "Damn shame, that Mustang," he muttered one afternoon, sipping bourbon from a glass that hadn't seen soap in weeks. "He's got the look. Death's already shopping for his boots." Helen didn't answer. She just kept walking, but it lingered in her mind. Would he die? She'd seen soldiers in the field hospital look the same, hollow-eyed and quiet. Not crying, not begging, just waiting. And most of them didn't make it, not because they couldn't, but because no one showed up to believe they could. That night, Helen lit the fireplace and sat in her mother's old chair with a photo album on her lap. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. The images were burned into her memory. Her son, Nathan, smiling with his first horse, a scruffy brown mare named Gravy. That boy had loved horses more than anything. Used to sleep in the barn sometimes, blanket over him and hay stuck in his hair. Then came high school arguments, recruiter visits, letters exchanged, and then silence. The last postcard came on a Thursday. 2 lines scribbled in black ink. "I'm okay, Mom. The sand's hotter than hell, but I've got a job and a buddy who makes a mean pot of campfire chili. Love you." That was 10 years ago. It was the first real freeze when Helen found him at the barn door, standing a little straighter. Not strong, not bold, but upright. She didn't say anything, just reached down, tore open a new sack of alfalfa cubes, poured them into the feeder. He watched her with that one good eye. When she turned to leave, she heard a sound. It was so soft she almost missed it. A step. Just one. She turned back. He had moved forward. A single hoofprint dented the straw between them. His breath fogged the air. He didn't flinch. She blinked. For the first time, her voice cracked when she whispered, "Good boy." The barn door squeaked open the next afternoon. "Miss Helen?" It was a child's voice. Helen looked up from the gate and saw a small figure by the fence. A girl, maybe 10, bundled in a puffy purple coat 2 sizes too big, red mittens hanging by threads. "I'm Lily," she said. "I live across the field. You've got a horse." Helen hesitated. "That's right." "He's skinny," Lily noted matter-of-factly. Helen nodded. "What's his name?" "I haven't given him one." The girl tilted her head. "That's not nice. Everyone needs a name." Helen almost replied with a sharp answer, but the words died before they reached her tongue. Instead, she said, "What would you call him?" Lily stared at the Mustang for a long time. He stood silent in the shadows, his breath rising like smoke. "He doesn't talk," she said, "just breathes real soft." She grinned. "Whisper. I'd call him Whisper." That night, Helen sat by the fireplace, a cup of weak tea in her hand, and whispered the name to herself once. Then again. It stuck. She didn't say it aloud to him yet, but inside it felt right. Days passed. The snow came in earnest. And through it all, Whisper stood taller. His coat, though still thin, gained a slight sheen. His eyes, both the good one and the cloudy one, grew brighter. Not clear, but aware. Then came the knock at the door. It was subtle, but firm. When Helen opened it, the wind slammed into her face. On the porch stood Troy Beckett's sharp suit, cowboy boots polished, a clipboard in one hand. He smiled with all the warmth of a January frost. "Mrs. Garrison," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "mind if I come in for a word?" Helen didn't move. "What about?" "Your property." She stared. Troy glanced over his shoulder toward the barn. "You're sitting on an old water right, ma'am. With that ridge runoff and a stream that feeds down through 2 parcels I've got buyers eyeing. With the right zoning, that land's worth more than you think. I'm not selling." His smile thinned. "Now, I know we haven't always gotten along, and high school's a long time ago, but I'd be remiss if I didn't." Helen's hand tightened on the doorframe. "You'd be remiss if you didn't leave right now." He paused, then chuckled. "I get it. Sentimental type. But you're living out here with a dying horse and no heat. Sooner or later, someone's gonna come asking about safety codes." Animals. Zoning permits. He tapped the clipboard. "Just think about it." She closed the door before he could say more. But that night, she double-checked the locks. And in the barn, Whisper raised his head at every sound the wind carried. One morning later that week, Helen opened the barn door and found him standing at the gate, waiting. She approached. He didn't back away. She reached out, fingers open. Her palm brushed the side of his neck, warm, rough, alive. She whispered, "Whisper," and he blinked slowly, then lowered his head just an inch. But enough. Enough to mean, "I hear you." The storm clouds rolled in that morning like a slow, aching memory. Not a storm of thunder or rain, just the thick, gray heaviness that settles over Wyoming skies when winter has decided to stay. Inside the barn, Helen sat on an overturned feed bucket, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold. Whisper stood not 10 feet from her, head down, steam curling from his nostrils with each quiet breath. It had been 3 weeks since she'd brought him home. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of slow mornings and slower steps, of watching and waiting and breathing the same stale air like they were both trying to remember how. Whisper wasn't healed, not fully, maybe not even mostly, but he no longer looked like he was trying to disappear. He stood with a kind of dignity now. Bruised? Yes. Scarred? Certainly. But present. Alive. Helen cleared her throat, though there was no one around to hear it but the horse. Her voice came low, careful. "I used to talk to someone every morning," she said. "Nathan, my boy. He was loud as a freight train and stubborn as a mule, but every morning I'd say good morning, and he'd grunt something back with a mouthful of cereal." Whisper didn't move. "I miss that sound more than I miss sleep." She paused. "I haven't talked much since." The words came easier than she expected, like stepping into water that wasn't as cold as you feared. "You ever lose someone, Whisper?" She chuckled to herself. What a dumb thing to ask. But he blinked, and something in his stillness felt like acknowledgement. "I lost him before I was ready. Maybe he lost me first. I don't know. I was angry too long and loving too quiet. One day I got a letter, and then I didn't get any more." Helen took a sip of her bitter coffee. "Some days I hear his laugh in my sleep. Others I forget the sound of it. That's the cruelest part." Footsteps, not hers, not Whisper's, quick and uneven. She turned toward the barn door. A small shadow leaned against the frame. "Lily?" The girl popped into view, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She held a bundle in her hands, a few peeled carrots, wrapped in a dish towel. "I asked Grandma if horses eat carrots," she said. "They do?" Helen stood and took the bundle, then walked toward Whisper. She paused just a few feet from his nose, unwrapped the towel, and held one out. He sniffed. Then gently, carefully, took it from her hand. Lily beamed. "He likes me. You're not so bad." Lily looked up. "You should give him a real name tag, like a collar, you know, in case he ever runs away." Helen smiled faintly. "He won't." Later that afternoon, the wind picked up, and Helen bolted the barn shut tighter than usual. She sat on her porch, sipping hot broth from a mug, watching the clouds chase each other across the ridge. Ray Malone sauntered over, bourbon in one hand, the other stuffed into his denim jacket. "Little girl's been coming around," he said. Helen didn't respond. "She's got eyes like yours, all fire and no fear." "She reminds me of Nathan." Ray nodded slowly, then glanced toward the barn. "You're going to have a fight on your hands." Helen squinted. "What kind?" "Troy Beckett. I hear he's been poking around the zoning board, asking questions. Folks say he wants to reclassify your land, force you off it." Helen sipped her broth. "Let him try." "He's not bluffing, Helen. If he files a public nuisance report on that Mustang, they'll take him, especially if he's declared unstable." Helen's voice lowered. "Whisper's more stable than half the men in this town." Ray chuckled, then tipped his glass. "All I'm saying is, be ready." 3 days later they came, not with sirens or threats, just 2 men in county-issued jackets, clipboards in hand, and Troy Beckett standing behind them with a grin like he'd already won. Helen stepped onto her porch before they could knock. "This ain't about safety," she said. "It's about money." One of the county men cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we received reports of a potentially dangerous animal, a wild horse that's been aggressive. He hasn't harmed a soul." "Yet," Troy added. At that moment, Whisper stepped out from the open barn door. His movements were slow, careful, but steady. He walked up behind Helen and stopped beside her, ears alert, posture calm. Lily had come through the backfield and now stood by the fence, watching wide-eyed. "He's not dangerous," the girl whispered. One of the men looked uncomfortable. Troy stepped forward. "That horse is unpredictable. My niece could have been hurt. You're putting this whole neighborhood at risk." He moved closer, too close. Whisper's ears pinned back. His muscles tensed. Then, in one sudden motion, he lunged, not to strike, but to block. He positioned himself between Helen and Troy, hooves steady, shoulders broad. Troy stumbled backward. The clipboard man muttered, "That looked protective, not violent." Helen placed a calm hand on Whisper's neck. "He's not the problem." Troy's face turned red. "You're all fools." Then he stormed off, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground. That night, Helen lit a fire in the barn and read aloud from one of Nathan's old letters. "If you're reading this, Mom, I hope the war's over and horses are still faster than tanks." She laughed, then wept. Whisper stood beside her the whole time, his breath syncing with hers like a heartbeat she'd almost forgotten she had. She whispered, "He would have liked you." Whisper leaned in and gently touched his forehead to her shoulder. And that was the first time Helen cried without shame. The snow came down in fat, silent flakes. It coated the pine needles, the fence posts, the rickety rooftop of Helen's cabin. By morning, the world outside had turned the color of ash and milk. Inside the barn, the only sound was the rhythmic crunch of Whisper chewing hay. His coat had thickened slightly, still patchy in places but healthier. Helen had taken to brushing him every evening. At first, he'd flinch. Now, he stood still. Not relaxed, exactly, but willing. That was all she needed. Willingness. That afternoon, she stood in the stall doorway, holding a faded envelope. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from memory. "I haven't opened this one," she said softly. Whisper shifted. It came a year after the last postcard. No return address. Just government stamps and a typed note. She pulled out the folded paper inside and began to read. "Mrs. Garrison, we regret to inform you that Staff Sergeant Nathan Garrison is presumed missing in action." She paused. "I never believed them, not really, not deep down. You ever feel something in your bones, and no matter what paper or people say, it just doesn't sit right?" Whisper blinked slowly. "I kept thinking, maybe he's not dead. Maybe he just can't come back, or won't." She sniffed, wiped at her cheek. "I blamed myself for being hard, for pushing him away, for not answering that last call. He was angry when he left." Her voice cracked. "But I was angry too." Whisper took a step forward, his nose almost brushing the paper. Helen let it fall to the floor. He sniffed at it, then lifted his head and exhaled. The breath was warm, almost forgiving. The next morning, Helen was hauling a bag of feed from her truck when she heard the sound of a motor. Not the low purr of Ray's truck or the clunky rattle of the mailman's van. This was louder, leaner. She turned just as a motorcycle crested the snowy road and pulled to a stop at the front of her property. The rider stepped off, tugging off a helmet. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, with dark stubble and tired eyes. He walked with a slight limp. "Mrs. Garrison?" he asked. She didn't answer. "My name's Jack Rayner. I served with your son, Nathan." The world tilted. Helen gripped the edge of the feed sack to steady herself. "He talked about you a lot," Jack said gently. "Said you made the best cornbread this side of the Rockies." She laughed, a small, surprised sound. "He hated my cornbread." Jack smiled. He said that too. Inside the cabin, Jack sat across from her with a cup of black coffee. He didn't touch it. "He saved my life," Jack said. "We were ambushed outside Ramadi. RPG took out our transport. Nathan dragged me out, tied a tourniquet with his own shirt. I passed out. When I came to, he was gone." Helen's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. He always wanted to be the hero, she said. He was, Jack said, but not just in the fight. He used to talk about this town, this place, said if anything ever happened, I should find you, tell you he forgave you. Helen's breath hitched. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but you got it anyway. That evening, Jack walked with Helen to the barn. When Whisper saw them, he stepped forward. Why, Jack stopped. That him? Bought for half a cent, Helen said, but worth everything. Whisper moved closer to Jack, then paused. Jack reached out slowly. Whisper didn't flinch. That's a rare kind of trust, Jack murmured. He's earned his name, Helen said. Whisper. Because he doesn't need to speak loud to be heard. They stood in silence for a moment. Jack turned. You know there's talk around town. I've heard. They want to take your land. Call him dangerous. Say you're not fit. Helen nodded. I'm ready. Jack raised a brow. Are you? She looked him in the eye. If they take him, they'll have to take me, too. 2 days later, Troy Beckett showed up again, this time with a court order. He stood on her porch, legal papers in hand, smug as a banker at a foreclosure. You've got 7 days, he said. After that, Whisper becomes county property, and this land goes to auction. Helen didn't even blink. Jack stepped out from behind the door. Troy frowned. Who's this? Someone who won't let you take what doesn't belong to you, Jack said calmly. Troy smirked. We'll see what the judge says. Then he turned and walked away. Helen leaned on the doorframe, exhausted. They'll come with trucks next time, she said. Jack nodded. Then we better be ready. That night it snowed again, and for the first time in a long time, Helen sat beside the fireplace with company, Jack, Whisper. A silence settled over them, not heavy but warm, the kind of quiet that only comes after too much noise, and just before the next storm. The wind howled like a wounded animal that night. It had been threatening snow all day, the kind of thick blizzard that swallowed roads and buried fences, and now it had arrived with full fury. Gusts slammed against Helen's cabin, rattling the shutters and whistling through the cracks in the doorframe. The temperature dropped with each passing hour, and the wood stove struggled to keep up. Helen stood at the window, watching the darkness bend and twist. Her breath fogged the glass. Jack paced in the corner, boots still on, jacket unzipped but ready. Whisper was in the barn, warm enough with extra blankets and hay, but Helen still worried. Lily didn't come by today, she murmured. Jack turned. That little girl? She usually comes to feed him a carrot, every day since Christmas. Maybe her folks kept her in. Storm like this, I wouldn't let my kid outside either. Helen's eyes didn't leave the window. Her grandma's got arthritis bad, lives 3 doors down from Ray. I haven't seen smoke from their chimney since noon. Jack stepped closer. You thinking what I'm thinking? Helen nodded. They were just pulling on heavier coats when the phone rang. Helen answered, heart pounding. It was Ray Malone. She's missing, he said, voice shaking. Lily ran off around 4, said she was going to find her dog. He bolted when the wind picked up. She hasn't come back. Helen gripped the counter. Did you call the sheriff? They're trying, but the roads are iced over. Said they'd send someone when they can. Helen looked at Jack. Jack was already grabbing the keys. We don't wait, he said. The truck wouldn't start. Battery too cold. Engine dead. Helen's heart sank. Jack swore under his breath, slammed the hood. Then, a sound. A sharp, urgent thud from the barn. They turned. Whisper. He was ramming the stall door with his chest, again and again. Not panicked, intent, like he'd heard, like he knew. Helen's breath caught. He's trying to get out. Jack hesitated. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? We don't have time to argue. They rushed to the barn. Helen unlatched the stall, and Whisper surged forward into the storm, snowflakes swirling around him like ghosts. Jack grabbed a bridle and blanket. "I haven't ridden in 15 years. Helen threw him the saddle. "Then it's just like riding a bike." He raised an eyebrow. "Only colder and higher." They didn't have a plan, only direction. The last place Lily was seen was near the northern tree line, where the meadows dipped toward the creek bed. Jack mounted Whisper bareback, holding tight. Helen followed on foot, wrapped in scarves and gloves, flashlights slicing through the white blur. It was nearly impossible to see more than 10 feet ahead. But Whisper moved with purpose, ears forward, hooves sure even as snow packed around his legs. They called Lily's name again and again. No answer. Then faint, barely audible over the wind. A bark. High-pitched, desperate. Whisper stopped. His ears twitched. Then he turned, veering sharply to the left, toward a thicket of snow-covered scrub. "Jack," Helen called. "He's leading you." Jack tightened his grip. "Let's go, boy." They weaved through the trees until Jack saw it. A small figure curled beneath an overhang, arms wrapped around something furry and shaking. Lily! Her head jerked up. Her face was pale, lips blue. She tried to stand but collapsed. Jack dismounted fast. "Hold on, sweetheart. We've got you." He wrapped her in the saddle blanket, tucking her inside his coat. The dog, a little mutt soaked to the bone, whimpered beside her. Helen reached them seconds later, out of breath, cheeks red with cold. "Thank God." Jack nodded, jaw tight. "She's freezing. We have to get her back. Now." The ride back was slower. Jack rode Whisper with Lily in his arms, the dog wedged inside his coat. Helen guided them from the ground, holding Whisper's reins and talking to him constantly, soothingly. "You're doing so good, baby. Just a little further. I'm right here." The snow fought them every step, but they made it. Back at the cabin, Jack carried Lily inside. Helen lit every lamp and threw logs into the stove. Blankets, hot water bottles, cans of soup, every remedy from every winter she'd ever survived. Lily stirred, eyes fluttered open. "Whisper," she mumbled. Helen smiled through her tears. "He found you, honey." The dog licked her cheek. By morning, word had spread. Ray told someone. Someone told someone else. By afternoon, the whole town knew. That wild Mustang, the one bought for half a cent? He saved a little girl in the middle of a blizzard. They called him a miracle, a guardian, an angel with hooves. But the sheriff still came, not to arrest, not yet, just to deliver a reminder. "There's still a court order, Helen. Hero or not, the law's the law." Helen nodded, arms crossed. Jack stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Lily was inside, napping on the couch. Whisper stood near the barn, steam rising from his back like smoke. "I understand," Helen said softly. "Just give me a few days," she added. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded once. That night, Helen stood in the snow, hand on Whisper's neck. "They're going to take you," she whispered. Whisper leaned into her. "But they won't take you alone." She looked toward the horizon, blinking back tears. "If you go, I go." Whisper nickered softly. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But in that quiet clearing, Helen's words stayed long after the wind carried them away. For days the town buzzed. Whisper's story spread faster than prairie fire in a dry July. "Did you hear? That old woman's horse found the Malone girl, dragged her back through a blizzard. Swear on my mama's grave, that horse is magic." Silver Cross had seen its fair share of rumors, but this one had proof. Ray Malone had snapped a blurry photo on his flip phone of Jack and Whisper leading Lily home, her tiny arms clinging to his chest. It showed up on the town's Facebook group. Then someone on TikTok reposted it with a shaky narration. This wild Mustang was sold at auction for half a penny, but when a little girl went missing in a snowstorm, he became a hero. By morning, the video had 80,000 views. By evening, it had 300,000. Inside the cabin, Helen didn't own a smartphone. She didn't even have internet. But Lily had one. Sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a thick wool blanket and sipping hot cocoa, Lily showed Jack the clip on her screen. "I made this last night," she said, proud and sheepish at once. "Thought maybe people should know." Helen stood at the counter, back turned, washing dishes with deliberate slowness. Jack glanced at the video title, "The 2.5-cent horse who saved us." He didn't say anything. Lily looked nervous. "Is that okay, Miss Helen? I didn't mean to make it a big thing." Helen turned, her eyes softer than usual. "Sweetheart, that horse saved your life. If the world needs to know that, then so be it." By the next day, local news was parked on the gravel shoulder out front. A woman in heels far too thin for Wyoming winter stepped out with a cameraman. She smiled too much and asked to get some B-roll of the Mustang. Helen raised an eyebrow. He's not a film prop. But Jack convinced her to let them shoot, on one condition. Whisper got a say. And when they approached the barn, Whisper stepped forward, ears flicked back, not in fear, but with attention. He let the cameraman get close. He even nudged the reporter's hand. The segment aired 2 nights later. They played Lily's video in full. The town watched from diners and living rooms. Even Troy Beckett's real estate office had it on mute, the captions rolling silently across the screen. The phone rang the following morning. Helen didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. A woman's voice came through, soft-spoken but confident. "Is this Mrs. Garrison? My name is Teresa McKinley. I run a therapeutic writing program in Bozeman, Montana. We saw the story about your Mustang Whisper, is it?" Helen tightened her grip on the receiver. "Yes, that's him." "I was wondering, would you ever consider letting him come up for a few months? We work with veterans suffering from PTSD. A horse like him, his calm, his history, he could change lives." Helen was quiet for a long time. "Why now?" "Because we see him, and we believe he wants to be seen." Later, Helen sat on the porch, phone in her lap, staring across the snowfield where Whisper stood under the ash tree. Oh. She felt Jack's presence before she heard his steps. "You thinking about it?" he asked. Helen nodded. "Part of me wants to say no. Keep him here, safe." Jack sat beside her. But he was never meant to be caged, not even in kindness. They sat in silence. "He could help others," Jack finally said. "So could you," Helen replied, looking at him. The next few days passed in a blur. People from across the state came by. Some brought baked goods. Others brought camera crews. One elderly couple drove 4 hours just to touch the horse who saved the child. Helen let them. Whisper stood still every time, patient, poised, as if he understood the gravity of his new role. Still the sheriff returned. Court orders still stood. Whisper was considered dangerous. A public hearing was scheduled. Beckett was pushing hard, still drooling over that plot of land Helen lived on. The water rights, the location, everything. Helen would have to defend not just the horse, but her home. The night before the hearing, Jack came into the cabin with a small box. He placed it on the table without a word. Helen opened it. Inside was a dog tag. Nathan's. Scratched. Bent. Burned along the edge. "I had it all this time," Jack said quietly. "I didn't know how to give it to you until now." Helen traced the letters with her finger. "Nathan always believed in things that couldn't speak for themselves," she whispered. "Animals, people, ghosts." Jack nodded. "So do you." The courtroom was packed. Not the cold marble kind, but the town hall reconfigured with fold-out chairs and a long table for the board members. Troy Beckett was dressed sharp, polished shoes, gelled hair. He held up photos of Whisper rearing once during the storm, claiming he was a public threat. Helen stood in jeans and her old army jacket. She didn't speak first. Lily did. She walked up to the microphone, boots too big for her tiny feet. "I was out in the storm. Everyone says he's dangerous, but he wasn't. He's the reason I'm here." Silence. Then Ray stood, then Jack, then a dozen others, one by one, not just talking about Whisper, but what he meant to them, to the town, to hope. The board ruled in Helen's favor. Whisper would stay, but the offer from Montana still stood. Jack approached Helen outside the hall. "You don't have to decide now." "I already have," she said. Jack blinked. "I'm not sending him." Jack's face fell slightly. Helen smiled. "We're going, both of us, Whisper and me." That evening, she stood with Whisper under the sky turning gold. "Time to finish what Nathan started," she said. Whisper lowered his head, and for a moment, just a breath, he leaned into her chest, not out of fear, not from the cold, but because he chose to. Spring didn't arrive all at once in Silver Cross. It crept in one thawed patch of earth at a time, one drip from the eaves, one robin's call at dawn, one softening of the wind's bite. The snow no longer ruled the fields. The white began to give way to brown, then green. The sharpness of winter eased into something gentler. Helen stood on her porch one morning, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. Her breath no longer steamed in the air. Her hair, silver and messy, was swept up in a lazy bun. Behind her the radio hummed softly, playing Patsy Cline. The barn was quiet now. The door stood ajar, its inside swept clean. Whisper was gone. He'd left 6 weeks ago, but his presence still lingered like the scent of old cedar faint, comforting, undeniable. The day Whisper and Jack left for Montana had been overcast and quiet. There were no crowds, no speeches. Just Helen standing beside the barn, her hand resting on Whisper's cheek, her voice low. "If you remember me," she whispered, "come back when the grass is tall." Whisper blinked, his breath warm on her wrist. Then Jack led him down the dirt road, and they disappeared behind the bend, the snow crunching softly beneath their steps. Helen didn't cry that day, not because it didn't hurt, but because it felt like the end of a chapter Nathan had started, and she'd finally turned the page. Life returned in its slow, stubborn way. The garden, once overrun with weeds, now had neat rows of budding shoots. Carrots, mostly. Whisper had liked those. Ray Malone visited more often, always with something in hand-fresh baked cornbread, a jar of pickled beets, an old book he thought she'd like. "I'm not courting you," he grumbled once, placing a pecan pie on her counter. Helen arched an eyebrow. "I didn't say you were." Lily came by after school most afternoons. She'd read on the porch, barefoot and chewing licorice, her backpack tossed aside. "Miss Helen," she said one day, "did you know you're on YouTube?" Helen smiled. "No, honey, I barely know how to turn the TV on." One Tuesday morning, a box arrived, no return address. Just a Montana postmark. Inside was a photograph Whisper, standing in a sunlit paddock surrounded by veterans. Men and women with weathered eyes and soft smiles. One man had no legs but held a brush in his lap, running it down Whisper's side. Everyone in the picture looked a little more whole. Beneath the photo was a note, handwritten in simple block letters. "He's still whispering." Helen sat down in her rocking chair and held the picture to her chest. April warmed into May. One evening after the last light faded and the crickets began their song, Helen stepped outside with a worn wool shawl over her shoulders. The porch creaked under her steps. Fireflies blinked lazily along the fence line. She walked toward the barn, not to feed, not to clean, just to feel closer. She leaned against the old stall door, running her fingers along the worn wood. Behind her, the wind stirred. A sound. Distant, faint. She turned. Nothing. Just trees and dusk and the smell of soil coming back to life. Then, a low thump. Soft, measured. Hoofbeats, her breath caught. She walked to the edge of the field, heart pounding. The grass had grown high, swaying gently in the twilight breeze. At first she saw nothing. Then, near the tree line, a flash of silver gray, a flick of a black mane, then gone. Helen stood frozen. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing. Only silence. But in the dirt near the fence line, a single hoofprint. Fresh. Still wet. She knelt, touched the print. It was real, not a dream, not a memory. A message. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she lit a candle, sat by the window, and wrote a letter. To Jack, to Whisper, to Nathan, to herself. She wrote about forgiveness, about second chances, about voices that didn't need words. Days passed. The hoofprint faded under new grass. The barn remained open. Sometimes a wild rabbit took shelter inside. Sometimes a hawk perched on the roof. But no horse came. And that was okay, because Helen had seen what she needed. One Sunday, Lily brought over her science fair ribbon and a story she'd written called The Horse Who Heard My Heart. Ray showed up later with a peach cobbler that wasn't as good as my mama's, but you'll live. Helen laughed. Her laugh surprised even herself. It sounded lighter now, less hollow. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe Whisper would return again. Maybe not. But every evening, as the sun slid behind the hills and painted the world gold, Helen would sit on her porch, mug in hand, and whisper softly to the wind, "I'm here, just in case." And sometimes, when the breeze caught just right, she swore she heard it whisper back. Not in words, but in presence, in peace, in the sound of something once broken, now whole again. If this story touched you even just a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so we know you're still out there listening. Or type 0 if it left you speechless, just like that halfpenny horse did. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of healing, hope, and the unexpected bonds between humans and animals. Because sometimes the quietest souls leave the loudest echoes. We'll see you in the next one.